All right, welcome everybody. It's Jordy Carswell here, partner at Actual Tech Media, back for another Gorilla Guide Q&A session that I think you're going to find really, really interesting. Today we're going to be talking about cloud automation in our Q&As. We're going to ask the questions that you may be thinking yourself when you hear that term, cloud automation. We're going to talk a little bit about a cool solution that's coming out as well. We're going to get some expert feedback here, specifically from Jesse St. Laurent, who is the CTO at Tuono, formerly of Simplivity HPE. And so welcome, Jesse. It's nice to have you with us on the Gorilla Guide Q&A.
Hey, Jordy, good to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. So what is cloud automation? Let's start with that one.
Yeah, it's a super loaded question, I think. So one of the most confusing aspects of cloud automation ends up being that it becomes super broad, which is automation of everything in the public cloud, and we're measuring it against, what does Netflix do? What does Facebook do? What does Twitter do? If we simplify it down, it's really automating to the point where you can point and click building of your infrastructure and your application in the public cloud, whether that's to deploy it or for CI environments or developers, spinning that infrastructure up to making it turnkey is really what it's all about.
And so there's a different term for this, right? It's not just cloud automation. Is it infrastructure as code? Did I get that right?
Yeah, and this is where you kind of have to slice it. So there's infrastructure as code is really about building the infrastructure itself. So if everything that whether you were born in the cloud or whether you were born in a virtual environment or pre-virtualization, there's networking infrastructure, there's instances or containers, right? There's all the plumbing that powers our IT infrastructure. That's really what we're automating with infrastructure as code. The other half of it that sometimes gets lumped in, and fairly, if we talk about cloud automation more generally, is configuration management. And this starts to look up into the higher level of the applications. And in some ways, you can think about it as the M&M theory, which is what's inside the crunchy coding and what's outside. What's outside is the infrastructure. What's inside is configuration management, right? Patches, versions, software installs, all that stuff.
Gotcha. So that brings up a good question. How is infrastructure management or infrastructure as code, different from configuration management?
Yeah, it's the whole, inside the guest or inside the container versus outside. So the infrastructure components really are about all of those things that we've historically think of IT as, which is the network, the subnets, the firewall policies, the routing, all those components. As we look towards what is configuration management, you can think of simplistically, that's what happens after you've got your virtual machine or your instance spun up, right? You have to install a set of applications. You have to configure those applications. You have to do a whole lot of things within your hosts. That's the configuration management side of the infrastructure, or of the application, I guess.
Got it. So do we think of infrastructure as code as different than just scripting per se?
So infrastructure as code, in a lot of ways, is a lot of the same skills as someone who's scripting, but it's pretty complicated scripting today. So one of the challenges that the industry is facing is there's a whole lot of companies who want to figure out how to capture their infrastructure as code. But there's a whole depth of what's required to do that, right? Suddenly you're going from a script, which was probably sat on your laptop or sat in your home directory, was pretty straightforward, to something that could now be tens of thousands of lines of code with a lot of the existing technology in the market. And it's complicated code, and it requires a whole stack to support it. And suddenly, the infrastructure code is being checked into GitHub, unlike what we think of as scripts, much more like what we think of as software engineering for the applications, the core business apps. So I think there's a big the industry is facing a challenge there, and really a skill gap for traditional folks who operated infrastructure. Scripting second nature. It's something we're all comfortable with, right? But there's a big leap to the software engineering, computer science design required for tens of thousands of infrastructure as code lines.
Right. So who's involved? Like when it comes to roles in the organization, who's involved in
Yeah.
deploying, planning, working on infrastructure as code projects or cloud automation projects?
I think that might be potentially the most loaded question about DevOps you could ask right now, which is the answer is yes. Is who is involved? Yes, everyone is involved, right? DevOps is the sort of we'll see if DevOps lives on as long as VDI is being the big project of the year. But DevOps is an approach, and in many ways it's become a completely overloaded term. And infrastructure as code is a slice of that. And in some organizations, we see folks who were traditionally software engineers in the development organization doing infrastructure as code, and that's one approach. Although a lot of software engineers don't necessarily want to go write that code, but you need to involve the developers. Other organizations have created DevOps teams where you have kind of these hybrid organizations who are writing that code, and that works as well. And you also see organizations where the folks traditionally running infrastructure in more of an IT role are the ones who are building it, and that can work as well. The challenge is most organizations are somewhere in the middle of that transition, going from whatever they used to do to whatever they do today. And it means in a lot of cases, everyone and their brothers involved in trying to figure out what exactly infrastructure as code means to the business, because you can't move to this type of approach for managing your infrastructure without also having a cultural change, right? It's not just the technology, it's the people and the process as well.
Gotcha. So this is intense. So there's a lot involved here. It sounds a little intimidating. No wonder it's been challenging to find the right people to take projects like this on. Is it worth the effort? Like, this sounds intense.
Yeah, so intense is a fair word. I think it's a big leap for a lot of folks to figure out how you get to infrastructure as code, and it can be a bit overwhelming to start down this path. And the benefits though become reproducibility, right? You can now run the exact same environment for every developer, the exact same environment for production, for QA. One of the if we think about it, how often through the years have you heard somebody say, I can't reproduce that in development. We don't see it. Or you get the phenomenon of saying, we see it in production, we don't see that in QA. Or these are all problems of infrastructure that's not reproducible, right? Infrastructure that was built by hand. And it comes down to a velocity problem as well. And in order to deliver, everybody says faster, 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 right? It was a few years ago we went to cloud for the theory was it was all about agility. And now it's kind of moved to we go to cloud for faster, 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 faster. And if we're pointing and clicking or typing commands to get through the build out of our infrastructure, it's not going to be fast enough, right? So automation becomes essential to deliver the velocity that the business is asking for. So I think it becomes worth the payoff, but it is work to get there.
Yeah, for sure. What is the dream? Like, and we didn't cover this before, so I apologize, but what is the holy grail of what you could do with this or what it could mean?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is if you say, "Hey, I run my entire application in Amazon today," I would say. I think the vision is you could say, I really, we met with Microsoft yesterday, we met with Google yesterday. Someone showed up and said they want to give us a giant discount on infrastructure and and their services. We want to move. Right, we all have nightmares. Anyone who's moved a data center historically, right? You lose a lot of sleep planning and preparing for that. If everything is codified, the goal is you could be able to hit a button at midnight tonight and start building that entire infrastructure in another cloud provider, migrate into it, and have no impact, nothing to build manually. It just rolls into that new infrastructure. And point and click deployments of the infrastructure, the app, the entire stack.
So this really is possible now. We've gotten to the point. We've talked about this for a long time, but we finally are now here, which is really cool. So let's talk a little bit about sort of day one versus day two here. So how does this work as we go through the evolution of rolling this out and getting it staged up and going down this road? How do we start to do IT differently from that point forward?
I think the biggest difference is you're not jumping into a console or a GUI and pointing and clicking from here to build that infrastructure. Right? You start with a template of what you want to build. You capture that as code, and then your developers use that to build their app in. You want to roll to QA, use that same definition of infrastructure to build it out for your staging environment. You go to production, use the same thing to deploy it in production. And then, so that's kind of it's all part of day one, essentially, right? It's all getting that infrastructure built in a consistent way. Inevitably, though, infrastructure evolves, right? There's a change in the needs of the application. We move providers, we switch networking, we change rules about the firewall, whatever it may be. You have to be able to make that change and do so in a predictable, reversible, secure way. That's not a simple task, right? And I've talked to a lot of folks over the last couple of years in this space. Folks that have tens of thousands of lines of code that captures their infrastructure, not their app. That just builds the core infrastructure. And now, when you want to make a change to that becomes a non-trivial task. So having something that makes it easy to go in and make those ongoing changes, open a new port, whatever it may be, is critical to having this. Not every app is born today in a container, cloud native, and going to be gone tomorrow. Lots of apps are still long-lived, and that infrastructure gets managed over the long term.
Right. And so where do people get stuck sort of operationally with this once they get past day one and start rolling? What kind of blocks do they run into?
Yeah, I think a huge part of the blocks folks run into is the infrastructure as code frameworks today look complex. But when you start to get it, then you realize that there's another problem and another problem. So you start to ramp on infrastructure as code, and then you realize, well, when I build out my systems, I need to store passwords. Well, I better do that securely. Where do I put that? It looks like I need some sort of secret management. So the next thing you know, you went from this weeks-long build out of a framework for infrastructure as code to now a long, complicated project for secret management. And then you realize, well, I'm going to have to make that redundant, and it's going to be backed up someplace. And well, I have multiple teams, so I need role-based access control. And how do I version all this stuff? I guess I better integrate it all into GitHub. So it's really this black hole of complexity for a lot of folks, where you start with what looks like a hurdle you can get over, and then the complexity reveals itself over time, and it becomes even more daunting as you get down the path.
Well, these are some serious things to think about in the long run if you're looking at this. Maybe we could take just a minute before we move on and talk about governance. What kind of governance challenges are enterprises running into in maintaining sort of approved cloud infrastructure configurations? Like this is the kind of stuff that must keep people up at night, as organizations spinning up cloud wherever they want and whenever they want.
Yeah, I think there's a few different dimensions to that. There's keeping track of billing and all the things we've got actually pretty good at for cloud, right? And that's a fairly mature market. But when you think about the governance dimension of it, a great one there is you can just start with basic role-based access control. If you have anyone in your IT organization can hit a button and spin up an entire copy of this production app in any cloud environment, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. So what we've thought about is really the importance of role-based access control. So you can separate things a few different ways. For example, having ownership of defining the infrastructure. In a lot of places, that's a different team. That's the architect team or the software engineering team, or the person who deploys the infrastructure may be completely different. So starting to build role-based access control so that you can separate those things, who took the action, when they took the action, and you have auditability over that becomes really critical. Going into a console for the cloud provider and clicking through isn't a viable way to do that anymore. We need that audit log. We need to be able to look back across the business and say, who made the change, when did they make it, why did they make it, were they authorized to make it, all that kind of stuff.
Right. No, those are really good points to think about. Two, when you think about the challenges that are introduced by some common cloud automation tools in terms of ensuring adherence to baseline configurations, like is that totally manageable, or is that a nightmare, or how does that work? Trying to keep
Well, yeah,
things in line.
it's nightmare strong. I don't know if I never want to call existing tech in the market a nightmare, but it is tempting. The real problem that folks run into though is it's the it is one of the key dimensions of complexity, which is if everybody follows the process exactly, everybody understands how to use GitHub, everybody's putting on every change into GitHub, and we're tracking all those versions. Everyone's taking them out at the right time, we're putting them in at the right time. You have all your authentication set up and all your role-based access control set up. Then it sort of works. Although I will tell you, there are a lot of horror stories out there from folks who one typo in one file, applying that to update your infrastructure can wipe out infrastructure as well, right? So you got to get it. This is a very precise operation. When you're automating the build out, if you miss a detail, suddenly you go from building your production app to tearing down your production app by accident, and it's a very bad day for. It's probably a resume building event.
For sure. So let's move on to the ecosystem. And so there is an entire ecosystem around infrastructure as code that maybe people don't think about it until they're in, neck deep in these environments. What other tools or sort of workflow components are required to fully operationalize infrastructure as code?
Yeah, this is an area that you hit it right on the head, which is starting out is one thing, but then you realize what the scope of the requirements are over time in a lot of cases, and that's where it becomes essential to have a plan and to be able to go after that. There's no technology that operates in a vacuum in cloud, right? Everybody's integrating with other technology, and it's the nature. It's one of the actually great things that open source, I think, has brought to the industry over the years. One of the great side effects is we had a lot more integration of technologies and a lot fewer silos. That's the upside. The downside is if you have to build all 20 of those tools yourself and figure out how to get them all the right versions of the right ones to talk to each other, now the complexity became powerful, but the complexity shot through the roof, right? So really things like, well, we better keep all of our data in GitHub or in some source control system. So we have to teach the team how to deal with source control management. If we're going to do an application rollout, we need a plan on how to do an application or an infrastructure rollback as well. So there's a suite of technologies that need to be adopted to deliver that. If you're going to have passwords and certificates and credentials for the public cloud stored in these environments, you need a secure way to do that, which means some technology like Hashi Vault or some other secure secret management. And then you need to figure out how to make that redundant and highly available and back it up, right? So this is this sort of endless list of more and more stuff to build out the infrastructure that supports your infrastructure as code offering.
Yeah. Wow, it's a big deal. There's a lot going on there. That's for sure. Let's talk about enterprise applications or how we would actually roll this out. So this, like we've talked about, this is intense. There's a lot involved, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of skill sets required. How practical is it that the average enterprise look at this as a solution?
Yeah, so let me answer that in two different ways. I would say how important is it and how practical is it? I think it's essential from an importance perspective. So I'm not sure that there's really an option because we can't point and click or type one-off commands, to deliver the velocity businesses need right now. So we have to automate. In terms of practicality, there's a lot of different solutions in the marketplace. Some of them are extremely complicated. I think that provides a really big hurdle for a lot of folks, right? Getting on board with something that has a huge amount of work in that learning curve really is a major inhibitor for someone who's not a software engineer by trade, right? There's a spectrum of offerings. Some are more complicated, some are less complicated. You got to make sure you pick the one that matches your organization.
Yeah, good points. So is it harder with a brownfield adoption than if you're starting with a new thing from scratch? Like, where do people usually start here?
I think in most organizations, a new application is the most common place to start doing it. That's what we've seen with customers. But it's inevitable. It has to go back to the rest of the business as well. And the the hyperscalers end up being the poster children for this. Right? So we see the hyperscalers say, I'm going to do it just like they did. They have very complicated infrastructure. They have very expensive, well-trained, experienced engineers building this stuff. This is, they've done it 100 times already, and they're doing it on cloud native applications. What we see is that's fine, but there's a huge number of customers who have some cloud native. They have some stuff that's running in the cloud, but it's still in a virtual machine. And the reality is there's nothing wrong with deploying infrastructure that way, right? It's a bit blasphemy in terms of kind of what's hot today to say that anything that's not cloud native is okay, but it's okay. There are folks who've been running on mainframes for 40 years now, and they're going to be on them forever. It's VMs are not going away tomorrow. So being able to automate that stuff is critical as well. And even what we think of as legacy applications, that has to be automated as well. So we see it starts with a new application, but over time, those brownfield apps have to get pulled in as well, because once you see the benefits of codifying the infrastructure, it's really difficult to then think about managing the rest of your infrastructure in the way that we used to do it without having that level of automation. So it comes in and just kind of advances out through the infrastructure over time.
You don't know what you're missing till you see it, eh?
Yeah, it's the cloud story in general, right? You go to cloud and you realize that you're using these APIs to manage everything, and then you look back at your data center and go, I don't have an API for my data center. This seems like it's going to be a problem. Until you had that API, you didn't realize that nothing worked without it.
Right. So let's think about coding. We'll move on to that. So do I need to be a developer to play my role as a stakeholder in this process?
Yeah, the answer to that is it's really going to be dependent on what technology you choose to use to automate your infrastructure. So there's a huge spectrum of offerings out there. Certainly there are, at one end of the spectrum, you have a emerging technology company like Tuono. The most mature, well-known technology are companies like CloudFormation or technologies like CloudFormation from Amazon, or Terraform from Hashi. There's a huge difference in the level of technology expertise required to use these different solutions. And what I would say is folks should look at them and figure out what works for them, what is within their comfort zone. There are technologies that make it approachable for everyone, from a hardcore computer science person who wants to write the most complicated code possible, all the way down to the person who was a vSphere admin in the past and wants to move into cloud and figure out how to be a cloud architect going forward. You just have to figure out which one's the right fit for you.
And is there sort of a level of coding proficiency that would be like the baseline? Like you've got to be able to do X to be able to do this?
Yeah, I think the baseline we think of is if you can do some basic scripting, you should be able to do this. It's oftentimes we overcomplicate these things. I think one of the dangers in IT is you can have this technology hugging. Like, I'm going to keep all the knowledge and not share it. Is I think a dangerous thing that sometimes happens in IT organizations. And the cloud is right. The cloud is something that should be able to be used by everybody. There's nothing, if you were vSphere yesterday, it doesn't mean you can't be doing cloud tomorrow, right? If you're Windows or Linux, doesn't matter what your background is, you should be able to be moving forward in these environments. We think of it as if you can download some PowerShell and make some edits and get it to do what you want, that should be all you need to be able to move forward with infrastructure as code in the cloud.
Good to know. Well, that seems pretty accessible for most of the folks who'll be watching. So let's talk about Tuono for a minute, if that's okay. I had a look at what you guys are doing and watched the demo to see how quickly you were deploying infrastructure in the cloud. Can you give us the 30,000 foot of what you're doing there?
Yeah, I mean, our goal is really to make this easier for folks, right? To make it as consumable as possible. So if you think about what we're doing in infrastructure as code, it's really two big leaps. The first is making it so that infrastructure as code can be consumed by anybody, right? This is not, you don't have to be a software engineer by background. You don't have to understand all the gory details. If you can do a little basic scripting, you're off and running. I published a video recently. There was a demo of our technology working the same way a customer would deploy it. It took 8 minutes and 50 seconds, I believe, was the total time, which for the record was faster than I could make a cup of French press coffee. So this is,
I saw that one. That was good.
Yeah, I got a lot of feedback. I manually ground the coffee that I was trying to game the system. I was done grinding the coffee before the water boiled, so it didn't slow the process down at all. But that's the whole idea, right? To make it approachable. So that's the first thing we've done. The second is we think of it like an iceberg, right? Infrastructure as code is really the portion of the iceberg you can see. The ecosystem is the portion of the iceberg you can't see. That's what's going to sink you. So, but what we've done is we've integrated all of that into our platform. So when you think about secrets management, role-based access control, writing this stuff once and having it run in multiple clouds, built-in versioning, drift detection, right? These are all problems that you start to run into once you're partway down the path with infrastructure as code. We've built it all in. So secret management is type your secret in, hit save, and it's locked away at a vault with secured access. So it's making that entire stack delivered as a service. So as a customer, you log in and you're using it. There's nothing to build, nothing to maintain.
Awesome. Yeah, I saw that the rollback was the thing that caught my attention. That seems like
it's
a hard problem. The important thing, or one of the important things.
Yeah, I mean, what happens today is folks build a lot of code in order to be able to automate their rollback. We version what we call blueprints, which are the definition of the infrastructure, but we also version the environment, which is where you've deployed that blueprint. So if you want to roll back to a previous version of an environment, you hit that version, you roll back, and your whole environment's gone back to the way it was yesterday.
Very cool. So where are you with Tuono? Are there trials, demos available? What's happening on that front?
Yeah, so Tuono is active in market. We have you can certainly see more info on the website about all the pricing details are there, all the details about how the product works and what it does. We're actively looking for folks to come try it out. So we have a community edition offering early access that is up and live right now. For our existing customers are using a couple versions. We have a standard and a premium, so kind of a couple different versions that are available for customers. But anyone that wants to come try it out, you just hit us up for early access. We'll get you enabled and you can try it out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jesse, for answering our questions today. And hopefully these were helpful for those who are watching and trying to get a handle on what's involved in cloud automation, where some of the challenges are, and how you can get started. So we appreciate you being with us today. If you'd like more information on this, we hope to get more up on Gorilla.guide soon, where you can follow Jesse on Twitter. Jesse, what's your Twitter?
Jesse St. Laurent, my whole name.
Jesse St. Laurent. All right. And Tuono.com?
Tuono.com, you got it.
All right, perfect. Thanks for being with us, and thank you for watching.